extreme approach, the Netherlands government are looking at cutting out the middleman entirely. This doesn't give you your milk, but it gives you your meat. They're trying to generate in vitro meat. And in vitro meat, the climate emissions from in vitro meat, should it be successful, will be far less than that from natural meat. So at the moment, so this is a fake photo. I was trying to find real photos of in vitro meat. And I was scouring the net and I couldn't work out what was real and what was fake, so I decided to put one that was obviously fake. But the current state of the art of in vitro meat, as far as I'm aware, will not produce stuff like that. It will produce stuff that is a bit like kind of mushy, mince, but not even quite mince quality yet. But there is serious work on trying to produce in vitro meat. And interestingly enough, in the US, one of the vegetarian advocacy groups, rather controversially, has produced a prize for the people who can produce in vitro meat most effectively. So some other vegetarian advocacy groups don't approve of this, but anyhow, they've gone for that. So in vitro meat is a serious proposition in the future. So the next approach, so that was jumping on, trying to create a small bandwagon. So if you create a new bandwagon, what you would be doing is effectively going for an area where government funding is limited at the moment, generating technologies, and then saying to the government, actually we can do serious work in this space, and both private and public investment would follow. So this next approach is looking at enabling services. So rather than going directly at trying to reduce emissions, can you provide enabling services which help companies engage with the emissions issue? And climate change, both climate change and decarbonisation, requires massive amount of information management. And the IT companies are very aware of this. If we look at as time goes on, more and more information management will be required. So Walmart is part of a consortium which is working really on pushing requirements down their supply chain. And Hewlett-Packard did this as well. Push requirements down their supply chain. I think some of you were talking about this in your groups earlier. Pushing quite strong requirements down the supply chain with regard to reporting on emissions, reporting on the carbon footprint of individual components, so that people at the top end of the supply chain can work out the carbon footprint of their entire product. Or, in the case of Walmart, so they can give to their customers information about the carbon footprint of the products that their customers are buying. So there's a vast information management problem here, and as a result of that, there is real opportunities for IT companies to deliver products and services. And this is one that is rather interesting. SAP are famous effectively for corporate information management. And SAP are grasping this nettle quite seriously and seeing what they can do. This is one where they have produced a system which does dynamic carbon footprinting. Dynamic carbon footprinting, which takes a product and follows it from its entire life effectively. You have RFID tags on things, and you can follow where they're being shipped from and to as they come along, and as different parts get put together, you can aggregate the carbon footprint. And this means that, so this particular example is a Coca-Cola bottle. Some Coca-Cola is manufactured in one country, some Coca-Cola is manufactured in another country, and so different bottles will have different footprints. And as a result, as the customer, you can scan the Coca-Cola bottle with your mobile phone, and it will tell you the exact carbon footprint of that particular Coca-Cola bottle. And you see here, we've got one there is at 200 grams, one at 170 and one at 140, because they've been manufactured in different places, using different processes. So this is quite innovative, quite interesting. I'm not entirely convinced about the value of this, because I think it will actually lead to even more customer confusion than already exists. Customers are already quite confused about the carbon footprint labelling. However, in the corporate world, this can be very valuable. The corporate world can use this to really accurately measure their carbon footprint of their entire supply chain, and therefore be able to give far more accurate figures than they do at the moment, which is based on a lot of estimation, guesses about transportation, etc. So this would, I believe, this won't be useful in the commercial world, but I think, sorry, not in the commercial world, in the consumer world, but will be valuable in the corporate world. So next, part of a package. So the big bandwagons I was talking about earlier are where there is sufficient interest from governments to provide big carrots and sticks. So if we look at smaller sources, these smaller sources are less prone to big carrots and sticks. They're things that maybe have a certain amount of emission, but that emission isn't, they're not a big emitter, and so the government isn't going to force you to do stuff so much. There'd be a bit of carbon pricing, of course, but that won't be a significant part of your overall pricing. But the government is going to either force you to do stuff or particularly fund a lot of work to help you out. So these small sources attract less attention from the government, attract less funding, but nonetheless are still under pressure. And the example, so as a result of that, carbon reduction alone is not enough to justify action. However, if you can put a package together of something that is of value, which carbon reduction is part of that value, then you can, if you like, increase the incentive for people to buy. So this is the other way of doing it. You put a valuable package in where carbon reduction is just one part of that. And the example we've got here is something I personally worked on at Hewlett Packard, and this is the personalised print-on-demand newspapers. This is something that there's a lot of interest in the newspaper world in. The personalised print, if you look at the newspapers, you find that about 20% of printed newspapers don't get bought, they get pulped. So they're not sold because the newspaper purchaser is notoriously fickle. They will buy in different shops, they won't necessarily be loyal to a particular newspaper. They will make a decision on the day as whether or not they're going to buy a newspaper. So the newspaper purchaser is notoriously fickle, and as a result it's very difficult to predict demand for newspapers around the place. So if you could print on demand, that is a lot better. You could reduce your waste by about 20%. On top of that, if you look at the amount of actual text that people read, they on average read about 30% of the whole newspaper. So 70% of newspapers are unread. So 20% of newspapers are wasted, 70% of the ones that are sold are unread. So a phenomenal amount of paper is being used, which is effectively going to waste. And that paper has a high carbon intensity. Paper is a very energy-intensive manufacturing process. And I can't remember the figures offhand, but I worked out that the newspaper industry is approximately the same size as the domestic aviation industry in the UK in terms of emissions, because of the energy that's embodied in the paper. So, and if anyone really wants the figures, I can search them out another time. And so we're working on personalised print-on-demand newspapers, newspapers which contain only the articles you're interested in, the advertising that's most likely to be of interest to you, printed when you want it. And that would allow you to have something which is of more value to you, therefore the newspapers can charge slightly more. We'll have less pages. It won't have, if you're not interested in cricket, then it won't have the cricket stuff. It will have more value, less pages, and also a far more interest to advertisers. So a low carbon product, but the value of the low carbon part is only a small part of the overall value proposition. Okay, so next, and again, I would like to reiterate, I'm neither advocating these things nor advising investing in them, but anticipating future needs. So this is a longer term play, developing IP which addresses longer term needs in society.